Hi, everybody. Hello. Welcome. We don't see your faces, but we feel your energy. We see those numbers tick up. Thank you so much for joining us today. We'll give everybody a second to get settled before we start, give you a couple of logistical pieces of info, and then get started. Feel free to grab some water or a snack or something. We'll be together about an hour. And happy Sunday. Awesome. Looks like the numbers are steadying a little bit. So I'll just give you guys a couple of logistical points. We're going to be together an hour. So we'll get everyone out of here around 5 o'clock Eastern time. The first 40 to 45 minutes or so are going to be a conversation between Lynn and Dominique. Feel free to ask questions in the Q&A at any time. We'll let those questions collect. And then at the very end, Annie will come in and ask a bunch, depending on how much time we have. So feel free at any point if a question arises, enter it in there, and then we'll come back to them at the end. Obviously, this session relies on the internet, so we're hoping that all goes according to plan today. If anything goes funky, bear with us while we fight the tech demons, and we'll get everyone out of here. But hopefully, a session like this, pretty straightforward. And mostly, we're just so grateful that you've decided to spend this hour with us, and hopefully, you all got to see the extraordinary reading of Skeleton Crew this weekend. And we'll get into that a little bit more deeply. Annie, I'll hand it over to you, and I'll come back at the end.
Sounds good.
Awesome. Enjoy.
Thank you, Claire. I'm Annie McRae. I'm the Associate Artistic Director at Atlantic. Welcome to Live with Atlantic Remix. We have spent the weekend watching Dominique Morisseau's phenomenal Skeleton Crew. I've watched the virtual reading about 8 times and can't get enough. It was fabulous. And we couldn't be happier to have esteemed playwright and friend Lynn Nottage here to interview Dominique. So we can't wait for their conversation. But before I turn it over to them, I just wanted to quickly say, while we wait this period out before we can return safely and gather in theaters again, we are relying on donations. So if you enjoy this free programming and feel so moved, we would love it if you would consider making a donation of any size to Atlantic Theater during this time. So without further ado, take it away, Lynn. Enjoy.
Thank you, Annie. Hi, Dom.
Hey, Lynn.
I'm so excited to be here with you on this Sunday. I never get to sort of sit one-on-one and have a conversation. So this is going to be a real pleasure and honor for me. And I just wanted to begin by saying how much I loved Skeleton Crew from the very first reading that I saw at the Lark Theater. I just was so struck by, how craftfully you were able to tell this large, expansive story in a way that felt very intimate and human and visceral. It stayed with me. And then, I've seen the play twice subsequently. And I know that Skeleton Crew is part of your Detroit play cycle, and that those plays have a real emotional connection for you. And I was just wondering whether you could just begin by sharing some of the origins of Skeleton Crew.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you. I love you, and I love that we both write stories of the working class, and that it's a important community, to archive, I guess. And I, coming from Detroit, of recent, I'm realizing that what I thought was my entry point to Skeleton Crew, it was something else, because I've always said, I had 3 plays I wanted to write about Detroit, about 3 different eras, because I was trying to learn the DNA of my city, and study its history, and study the history of my family. I was inspired by August Wilson, that he did that for Pittsburgh. I thought I would tackle 3, not 10, and and so that was my original entry point. But I recently lost my father in February. And I have sort of been, now I've known my father. I know who he is. I know, I know how I was raised, I know the kind of man he was, but in his passing, I've like found like his writings and his, things that I just had not spent a lot of time with before he
Right.
passed. And I read this to the Skeleton Crew cast before we started the rehearsals for this reading series. But he had written an article in 1983, and it was called, and it was for our local union in Detroit, and it was an election time, and the headline of the article was "The workers are the power in this country." And my father's entire article was about working people, how the political parties are ignoring the working people, how that's where it just really, it resonated. It sounded like it could be written right now. It sounded very of the moment of the political conversations that are happening right now. And my father was writing about this in 1983. And I sort of had this moment of looking at that and going, oh, I thought I had the idea to write Skeleton Crew for myself. I'm like, that didn't come from me. That came from this dude that raised me and like brainwashed me and put all this stuff in my head. So I'm like going backwards, like reverse engineering me and going, my father completely controlled my brain, But I recognize that the things that I'm passionate about, and the activism that sort of guides me has been instilled in me since I was a kid,
Yeah.
from him. So I feel like it's a little bit of that. And also, like Detroit right now is a place of essential workers.
Mm.
I mean, every place is, but I think why the numbers were so high in Detroit and they're rising again is because so many Detroiters are in essential work type of jobs, and many people in my family are. And so, again, it just like, it feels like I'm back to Skeleton Crew,
Right. No, I
Like,
hear.
yeah, so yeah.
It's so interesting because right now in this moment, this COVID moment, so often when you hear, or not even just COVID moment, this election moment, and so often when people, the media, politicians talk about working class, they seem to be focusing on white, blue collar workers to the exclusion of Black and Latinx folks who are making up the majority of the working population, and the people who are particularly vulnerable, because they are essential workers. And it's a great frustration of mine is that there is such a de-emphasis on us as working people. And we are the working people. And I was hyper aware of this, like when I was writing Sweat. And one of the things that I particularly loved about, not just Skeleton Crew, but all of your writing is just the focus, that hyper focus on the way in which, we work on a daily basis, but also you look at the work from a position of intersectionality. So you're not just looking at race and class, but you're also looking at gender. When I was rereading Skeleton Crew, I was thinking a lot about how you focus on the female worker. And I was wondering whether you can talk about why you chose those two characters, a woman who's at the sunset of her career and someone who's like right in the midst of giving birth.
Yeah. It's this is nobody's ever asked me that, but this is
Oh,
there's
good.
yeah, and I think there might be an actual mechanics to it in my brain. Well, so Faye, the character Faye, is loosely, I have to say this for my family whenever they see this, loosely inspired by my aunt who worked in the factory and who I reached out to several of my family members. So my whole family worked in the auto industry, except for me, I did not. And, my brother and my mother, but I have like third, fourth cousins and aunts and uncles all worked in the factory. And my aunt in particular, she's just a tough woman. And in our family, I mean, she's my aunt that we're like, don't mess with her, like she's going to be the one she's gonna be the one to reckon with. And my mom's sisters, they all have their own personalities, and they've all inspired characters in my plays. They're Bunny in Detroit '67. They're like all over my plays. But this aunt in particular that inspired Faye, while she's not same gender loving, she's not. She carries to me like the fatigue and the years put in, the years that women put into the workforce, that are often undermined or under acknowledged. And so that's one thing. The reason why Faye, to me, in her gender identity in this story is important to me. I just, it wasn't, there was nothing really, I was not trying to do anything. I look at the women that I've seen in the factory. I look at the women in New York. One day it was a woman riding a train, and she was Faye. It was her. She was a train worker, and she was riding a train with other younger, like a Des, And I watched them, and I watched their interactions and their shit talking and everything. And I was like, that's them. That's them. This woman exists. She's a tough OG, And I was like, and I don't see this woman in narrative a lot, and I just don't see her. She's not on my TV screen. She's not there, but she's there. She's right across from me on this train right now. And I wanted to write her and put her in a city like Detroit, which is a lot more conservative, and its beliefs. And so Faye's son represents like the conservatism of Detroit. People don't think about Black people being conservative, but they're like both. They're like, we know, I mean, they're like, sometimes they're really like left, in certain things. And then they can be just straight up Stepford wife on some other stuff. It's just like, it's a very weird thing that it is, but it's that Black communities have a high deal of conservatism, right? So anyway, I just wanted to put that woman in Detroit because I know she's in Detroit. I've seen her in Detroit. I know she exists, and I want to make space for her, without trying to put my, that's not my journey per se, but I want to imagine her journey. And then with Shanita, there are women that, when I talk to auto workers, there's just women that work that line till they about to pop. And I'm like, what? Like, this is some real labor. Women are working that line. I want to know those women. And also, but the other side of it, Shanita was a little more intentional in that I also wanted to know, when I was writing Skeleton Crew, I was writing it way closer to 2008. Like now it's like, this is like a story about the past, but it's still about the present, But when I first wrote it, I wrote it in 2010. 2008 was just 2 years ago. Right. And I could not conceive of where Detroit could be yet, Like we didn't know, we were still in the thing that we're trying to get out of, if you will. And so to me, in those kind of stories, to find hope, I don't know how else I can't predict the future, right? I can't tell us something's going to happen that didn't happen. What can we do? And I was like, well, the dreams of pregnant women is where the future can be imagined, And so I intentionally wanted Shanita to represent what could come, what can be after this, and who we're leaving this world and this city to. And so that's why I chose them.
And it's so interesting. Like you, I really lean into optimism. And I was writing, I guess, Sweat around the same time you were writing Skeleton Crew.
Yes, I remember we were both talking about it.
Looking back at 2008, and everyone is talking about like how prescient we are and how we were talking about the issues, but we couldn't know back then when we were writing it. We were just painting these very detailed, rich portraits of working people who we had encountered and who we felt passionate about. But I know that I struggled so much with finding optimism at the end, particularly because of the conversations I had people who in their lives just couldn't see the rainbow, and I did my best, but I have this very ambiguous ending, but I couldn't quite find that ray of sunshine that I feel like is throughout all of my other plays. But the other thing that you were talking about that I found really fascinating is just talking about like the class dynamics within the play. And when I think of the audio industry, you know, I grew up in New York City, and so I'm miles and miles away from that. But one of the things that I think a lot about is how it really provided access to the middle class for a large swath of Black people. It gave people a certain level of privilege and economic security that folks, you know, got those jobs. They had those jobs for 40 years. They left those jobs with a pension. They put their children through college, and how the moment that you were writing about, that was beginning to disappear. It's like Faye and Shanita were dealing with their hours being cut back, and suddenly that American dream that was so seemingly accessible
Yeah.
was drying up for them. And I thought that you really beautifully illustrate that and work, you know, through all of these different characters. But I'm really wondering about, you know, the management versus worker dynamic.
Yeah.
And when you're reminding that, what is the conversation that you wanted to have?
You know, it's funny. I remember when you were working on Sweat. We were at the Lark. I think you
You're at the
told
Lark.
me.
I think it's the same time.
Yeah, I think you told me at the Lark, you know, I'm working on something in middle management, you know, and I was like, yeah. And we didn't finish our conversation there, but I remember leaving with, oh, we're both like, yeah, middle. I didn't even, until you said that word, I didn't even think, yeah, middle management. That's what I'm dealing with, right? I'm writing about just someone who's on a different side of the line, but I'm like, yeah, and he is in middle management, but I just didn't think of it that way. And when you said that, I was like, right, because the people in middle management, those are the people with no power,
Yeah.
and yet perceived power. And so then they're like, they're in a crisis, you know, and they have to do the dirty work really of the company without any of the power, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like when I was working on Sweat, I have a character, Cynthia, who's the African American woman who finally is able to get a tiny bit of power.
Right.
And she finds herself grappling with trying to rescue the people who she works with, but also having to answer to management in ways that are very difficult and are eating away at her very being.
Yeah.
And just that dilemma of finally, you know, particularly as African American, reaching the point where you can begin making decisions and begin sort of impacting how that factory floor is run and shaped, and yet you still do not have the power to do anything.
And yet your fellow workers.
Yet your fellow workers, it's kind of like Congress, you know?
Yeah, right. And they see you as a betrayer, really,
Yeah,
of the workforce.
of the
Yeah,
entire workforce. Yeah.
yeah. And it's hard. I mean, yeah, when I did the same thing, I do always parallel Cynthia and Reggie. And I think it's interesting that those are two Black characters who are carrying on the work and who are sort of having to talk to their co-workers, or you know, or former co-workers or whatever, on behalf of a company that does not reflect that like the upper management at that company is probably, we never see either in both of our plays, you don't ever see
You never see them, but they're there. They're like looming. They're
they're there. They're like
shadow.
this. They're like, you know, but we never see them. And so it's like I always go in our imaginations, who are we thinking is there, you know? But in the idea that they are likely not, like they are likely white and possibly with white and male
Yeah,
executive
yeah,
leadership
yeah.
that's like there, you know, over these like Black men and women workers is always an interesting thing to me, to then put it so that the Black characters have to do all of the bidding, you know, on behalf of this company. And and the crisis that it brings both Cynthia and Reggie is like it puts them in crisis,
Yeah.
and it does damage to them. Actually, it does them harm. um and then in different ways they have to figure out how to it, repair the harm for themselves if they can, you know, or they succumb to a different fate because of that harm. But I think that is interesting to me, like watching how and I feel it in our own industry. I mean, in the theater
Yes.
industry.
Yeah. I mean, that's what we're grappling with right now, right?
Right. It's like when and I found I'm talking to so many of my colleagues who work in the region who are like the one, you know, BIPOC person in the region at their theater or whatever. And and I just had this moment in Hollywood. I just had this with some executives the other day where I just felt like, you know, it's very hard to try to negotiate yourself and what is sacred to your community underneath authority that does not represent that community. It's
That's,
really hard.
that is
You
so true. You know, I hearing you say that, I think about it because I teach in the university level, and there's so many issues that come up within the classroom, particularly with regards to the BIPOC students. And I want to be a good ally, but so often you find yourself hitting that, you know, the bureaucratic wall.
Yeah.
And trying to explain to students, it's like, I'm so on your side and I am advocating for you, but there are, you know, there's this wall that is insurmountable that I can't even climb. So we all have to like join forces and batter it with our shoulders together.
Right,
You know,
right.
it's so,
That
so true.
bureaucratic wall is so real. And yeah, you're right. I don't think people understand. I mean, in our own industry, I don't think people understand how the industry works. So again, the faces, you know, I want to tell people, like, if you're seeing my face, then you already don't know how the power works if you think it's me. Because
If you think, yeah,
usually the faces of power are not the real power. It's the faceless who
if
are
you
the
think,
real
yeah,
power.
which is absolutely true. And I know we've had this conversation before because both of us have worked in the commercial realm where essentially you're writers for hire, and there's assumptions because so often you're the face that's doing the interview that you are pulling all of the strings, that you're
Right.
making the decisions about, you know, who is the director and who's there, and you really are not. And I wish there's some way that you could explain that to people.
Right, right. I try. I'm trying to find the ways to get people to understand what that is, you know. And it, you know, I mean, but skeleton crew and sweat. Do you see
Yeah,
the
well,
faceless leaders? No, you
but that's
know.
what it is about. I mean, it's also about the way in which you know, the powers that be, the invisible powers that be, manipulate the workers in such a way that when there is economic stagnation or a downturn, is rather than turning on the powers that be, they turn on each other.
That's right.
You
I always
know,
feel that way when I call like a phone company or like a bill collector of some sort, you know. And I'm always like trying to talk to them worker to worker, person to person, right? Because I know you work on behalf of your company, but this company has built a wall. So when I call to talk about why is this such and such bill this way, or why, you know, how my services have not come down the way they were supposed to, I'm talking to like the lowest person
yes.
in this chain of command. And they have to now, and the way that they're handling me. So I always have this moment when I'm talking to a worker, like, we don't have to do this because I'm not even, you know, this isn't your fault. And we
Yeah,
both know this isn't your fault.
right.
So but you don't, but I need you to remember I'm a human being. So
Yeah.
let's both remember each other's a human being. I know that you have to do the bidding of your company. I'm telling you, let me talk to the person I can cuss out. That's not gonna be you.
I don't know
I'm not gonna
what
cuss you
with
out.
Verizon, like, and my husband knows this. I had like an epic war with Verizon
Yeah.
over
I've had an
I'm
epic
not
war
gonna
with
even bore you
Verizon
with all
too.
the little details, but it was epic. You know, I feel like I have to write it at some point just to purge the experience. I was talking to one work and I said, I, like you said, it's like, I know this is not your fault.
Right.
Just bump me up to the next person
Not me.
so that I can talk to them. And finally, I got like all the way up the food chain. And the guy said, I am shocked that you got this far. He's like, no one gets here. I'm like, you don't know how tenacious I am.
No one gets here.
No
No
one
one gets here. It's just like, but you have these people who can't make any decisions, you know, dealing with most of the people. You know, like that's just like how stressful that is. And then they carry that stress and trauma. And so then you pick up the phone and they have an attitude. You're like, why do you have an attitude? I don't even know you yet. We haven't even talked about anything, you know, but it's just like, because I really don't have if I'm the worker on the ground, I really don't have the capacity to help you. I'm here to manage you and get you out of the way. That's my job, is to get you out of the way and not let the company be bothered with you.
Yes,
And
buffer.
that's, yeah,
I want
problematic.
to circle back to Skeleton Crew.
Yeah,
And, you know, speaking of looming danger, um, the gun.
yeah,
Because I was just writing something really recently, and it surprised me when the character reaches into the drawer and pulls out a gun. I'm like, oh, you
yeah.
know, I surprised myself. I'm like, what am I going to do with that gun now?
You doing a gun?
The gun. And so I was so just curious about um, why you brought the gun into the conversation.
Mhm. Yeah. I mean, it's funny because it's like there's always that that theater rule, which I don't follow. I know them,
Yeah,
but I'll break them, right? But there's always that when you bring a gun in, you got to go off.
yeah.
And I'm like, does it go off literally or figuratively? Right? You know, like I'm like,
I'm with you. It doesn't always have to go, but I'm always interested
yeah,
about just the tension and the danger and
yeah,
the way in which drama is escalated when the gun is introduced. And it is such a deliberate choice.
yes. Always, isn't it? I mean, it has to
Always.
be. Well, hopefully it is, you know, hopefully it's a deliberate choice. But yeah, and Skeleton Crew, I mean, again, I'm dealing with a Detroit that is, you know, I don't like when Detroit is marginalized as this violent, dangerous place, you know, like like that is its only narrative. Like that's all that comes out of that, because that's not true. And yet the danger in Detroit is real. You
Right.
know, the danger in Chicago is real, but when Chicago gets reduced to being violent, then that's pisses Chicago off, you know, and they feel very mishandled in narratives that do that to it, you know. Same with Detroit. Detroit gets very pissed off when you reduce it, you know.
Right.
And yet it is, but we're not gonna we can't ignore that there's a violent world existing, especially when you start taking people's jobs away.
Right.
Right. Like, you start taking people's jobs away, you create like economic decline and systemic oppression, and you find all these people and disenfranchised people without resource, you know, and so that's a recipe for violence.
Right.
And so I like to look at it holistically like that. So with Dez, he's coming into work, and he is in a increasingly violent city that this, to me, economic downturn sort of induces, you know. And so so that was one thing. And then the other thing is because I just know, so Michigan is I think it's an open carry state. Like you can have a gun, you can bring a gun, it's not illegal to have a gun and at work. It's more about breaking work policy, right?
Right.
Because you can carry a gun to work.
So it is a little
You
scary
have a
to think
license.
about your coworkers bringing guns to
It
work.
is a little scary thing about your coworkers bringing, you know,
You
and
know,
yet
I just think about playwrights and actors bringing guns to work. That's very scary
that
to
would
me.
be so, like, please don't do that. Like, please have a policy theaters. Don't let us do that. But it is also, you know, Des actually gets robbed on the way
Right.
to work,
That's right.
right? And so then it's like, it's to the argument, does he carry a gun or does he not carry a gun? And now, honestly, this was before, like, this was not in conversation with like gun control or
Right.
mass shootings. I didn't even, that wasn't really that wasn't a big thing like it is now. When I wrote this, it was really a small thing for me, you know, that I know Detroiters were trying to navigate, like how do they survive in the city and still be workers and have love for this city. Like what's that crisis of consciousness that's going on? And it's become a bigger conversation, but that wasn't, for me, that wasn't even where it started. It literally is about how they receive him and what we think of him because he carries a gun. So it's also about our bias. You know, I do it in Pipeline too. I'd like to agitate our biases, you know, a little bit and see like what bias are we putting on characters versus who they really are.
Yeah,
You
who they
know,
were. Yeah.
what assumptions that we're gonna make about Dez because we see him with a gun, and
Right,
that
which is what I was getting at, which I thought was so interesting, is that you paint an entire narrative on top of this character simply because he walks in with that gun and you see it. And
yeah.
then you subvert that in a really beautiful way. But I know we had a conversation earlier, and I just wanted to ask you this question. It's something that Saidiya Hartman says, which is, how do you revisit the scene of subjugation without replicating the grammar of violence? And and I think a lot about that in terms of my own work, because I feel like there are things that need to be seen and need to be discussed, but I don't want to re-traumatize people, nor do I want, to lean into exploitation. And I'm so curious about negotiating that careful balance, walking that razor's edge.
Yeah. You know, I know we've talked about this a
We're
little
talking
bit.
about this.
I know. I mean, you know, it's just it's sort of it's funny because sometimes, like when we first did this play at Atlantic 4 years ago, 4.5 years ago, I remember, you know, people, you know, it went over well. But I remember sometimes I would talk to audience members and they would say how, oh, it was so depressing, or it was so and I was like, It's not depressed. I would describe Skeleton Crew as depressing, you know, but that's people are receiving it that way, or whoever feels that way is receiving it as depressing. I feel like that's a projection onto those people. Like you're sort of projecting what you would feel in those people's position, as opposed to what those people are actually giving off, you know? Like those people are not giving off depression. They're giving off, they're giving off, if anything, tenacity and the will to fight. I do say this though, but they are in grief, you know? It took me, I think when I was working on At the Lark, that's when I figured out at one point, I was like, hey, these four characters are the five stages of grief, you know? I was like, denial, Shanita, anger, that's Des, negotiation, that's Reggie, bargaining, negotiation,
And
that's Reggie,
Faye
you
is
know,
acceptance, right?
Faye is acceptance. She's like, I feel like Faye is both depression and acceptance, you
Yeah.
know? And so I'm like, that's like, she might start in depression at one point in the play and end at acceptance, which is like, or she's already like in a depression in a sense. And when the play begins, and she's moving toward at the end of the play, acceptance. And so I'm like, there's grief here, but grief doesn't have to, I don't know. There's just that many of us are experiencing grief. We live in a space of pain and grief. And
Right.
I don't want to see stories absent of our pain. Like
Right.
we're dramatists. Like we're supposed to be able to, first of all, for my own healing and survival, I need to be able to express my pain. I think it's very oppressive to tell artists and to tell Black artists to not write about their pain.
I
That's
know.
that feels unfair, you know?
It does feel really unfair, and you feel it feels disingenuous on some level to avoid talking about something that's the reality for many people. And one of the phrases that I love is sustaining the complexity of life, which means that you're constantly negotiating that place between joy and despair.
That's right.
And that's really the tension that creates drama. And there are going to be moments where you're seeing all of the beauty in one's life, but it's also, we're dealing with the reality of America right now, and a lot of us are in a great deal of pain. And I don't know how to put that pain on stage in a way that it's sort of all of the edges are softened and it's put into this little jar.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, I hear you when you say you don't want to traumatize. Like, I don't want to traumatize.
I don't want to re-traumatize, but I think it's an interesting conversation, and something that I'm constantly grappling with. It's like it's like when I was writing Ruined, it's like this is about gender-specific human rights abuse.
Yeah.
And how do you show that? Because it's necessary for it to be seen, because no one's talking about it. But I don't want to re-traumatize women who've been through gender-specific abuse. But in the same time, I don't want to soften the edges.
That's
So
right.
that it's easier for people to see it.
And then because if you soften the edges and if you don't make space for those, because yes, perhaps you could say, there's other stories about the continent of Africa where it's not, rooted in that pain and that disenfranchisement. But if we don't show that, we're not making room for the joyful stories. Like, and if we don't show that, then how are we in the real world getting that consciousness in our skin and in our blood and on our, and in our hearts to do something, to take action. So but I also wonder if I wonder if it's a wiring of the artist that makes that a different, that approaches that differently. Like Lynn, you are a very activist minded artist. So
Right.
your work is not just there to entertain or to make you just to get accolade as a writer, right? Your work is also there. You have used all of your plays. I mean, Sweat, and you took that to Reading, Pennsylvania, put that in the community, that you wrote about.
Right.
I took Detroit, my Detroit plays, that was in the community.
It was embedded in part of the writing of it is the active.
Yeah, it's the active, right? I put that in my community. Yeah. I put that in Detroit. I want Detroit to be talking about that and to get out front and be the leaders of the conversation around workers' rights and the leaders around the, Detroit 6-7's in my background right now, but like, the leaders are talking about civic unrest in our city. Like I want that to be something. So there's a call of action in the work, I think, when there's a pain. So to me, that's not traumatizing. When I'm asking you for action, when I'm asking you to think about this and do some action.
And so when you took the play back into your community, what was the response? Because I know when I took the play back into Reading and when we toured the Rust Belt, that people felt they felt catharsis in ways that audiences in New York did not. So I'm
Yeah.
curious about your experience with those audiences.
Similarly, there's a catharsis. There's something that happens also. So in Detroit, I did it with mostly local talent too. So
Right.
like, and then my plays have been done in like Wayne State University. Those young people were working on my plays. So it was like hearing my work and the mouths of Detroiters. It's like the best New York actor, and I
Yes, I
love
get
my
it.
actor. But there's just something like they're like a kid, like a kid who's younger than the role or just in college, but they're in Detroit. When they say the words, I'm like, the thing that I have to work really hard to get very skilled, some of my favorite actors to get their heads around, those guys do just by osmosis. It's like they just do
So
it
the
naturally.
language just sort of tumbles out.
It tumbles out of their mouths, and you're like, this is what it sounds like when you're not trying. This is what it sounds like when you're not trying. There's no technique. They just know it's in their
All the
cultural,
cadences and rhythms and just it's in the
yeah,
body.
it's in their cultural ancestral memory in a way,
Yeah.
and so it's like, it's amazing to hear. But also when Detroit experiences my work thus far, I was shook, I was terrified. I went to see Skeleton Crew in Detroit on my family night. So family night is when my entire family, this has happened at three or four shows now of mine that have been produced in Detroit at my theater. Detroit Public Theater is a theater that I'm on the board of and helped to build with
Okay.
with the women that started it. And every season that my plays are there, my entire family in Detroit buys a house. They buy a night.
It's so funny. My mom used to do that as well. When she
And
was alive,
it's
she'd
my
buy
brother.
like the whole house.
They buy the whole house.
The whole
My
house.
mother does it. She's like my agent, and she goes around all the family. She handles all the tickets, and we
Yeah.
have family night.
Yep.
And it's like, and let me tell you, Skeleton Crew's family night was the most terrifying night of my life, And for some reason, this night, a New York Times journalist came to Detroit to write an article about my work being in Detroit. And so like, it's intermission. And the journalist comes up to me with a camera, like, how do you feel? And your family's here. And and I'm like, I'm still looking for my uncle. Like, is he mad at me? I can't really tell. And they're like, tell us about how it feels. And I'm like, I feel terrible. I feel awful. Get out of my face. But it was because this is their story,
Yeah.
But it has also been it's been affirming. I found that people from Detroit that see it feel proud. They feel proud to be Detroiters. I am speaking to my city's resiliency. I'm speaking to the humanity, the heart, the toughness of the people that I know and love, that we all know and love.
Right.
And they feel that, and they feel seen. And there's just, I don't know, it's just something that happens.
But there's something enormous about people finally feeling like they're being seen in a way that's respectful and loving and kind. Because,
Yes.
and I think, sort of going back to what we're talking about, how do you not exploit people is that you lead with the humanity in and the truth.
Yeah.
And I think that the truth is never exploitative if it's handled in the right way.
Right. That's right.
And the other thing that struck me is you were talking about just the language in the mouths of the babes, like how it just felt very, very organic. And one of the things that I absolutely love about all of your work is just how poetic and musical it is. And just, it feels so effortless. I read your plays, I'm like, damn it. This is like, it feels like it just happened spontaneously, that there was no hand, it just tumbled out in all of its glorious poetry. But one of the other things that I also think that you do so beautifully is incorporate music into all aspects of the storytelling. And it becomes really part of the architecture of the play, like the soundscape and also the movement. And I was wondering whether you can talk just a little bit about how that soundscape and the movement are part of your narrative.
I'm so glad you asked that, because I think that in Skeleton Crew, I think there have been productions, I know there have, I just can't remember which ones, who feel like, well, we can do it without the movement and the stuff. And I'm like, no, you can't. I know that you feel like
Oh,
you
you
can't.
wrote it there. I mean, they kind of can't.
Right. But they have, some people have tried it and have done it, you know? So I say, I know it feels to you like without that stuff, this is a play that still works. So thanks. But why I put that stuff in there for a reason. And for me, the movement, the movement of the world, it's like when I think of trying to capture the auto industry and I go, I'm going to put them in a break room and I'm put these 4 workers in a break room. That's not the auto industry.
Yeah.
That's 4 workers in a break room. And
Right.
so when I'm trying to tell a story about the larger auto industry and its impact on Detroit and what automation is doing, has done to working people,
Yeah.
that's not all being captured in just that little break room with those 4
Right.
workers, you know? And so for me, that the movement piece is the automation of Detroit. And it is also the idea, the esoteric idea of like it's how to make space for the legend of auto workers. Make it, this plant is more vast than 4 workers. Plants have lots of workers. And
Right.
to isolate it, I'm isolating it in 4 voices, but I'm not, I don't want to leave it on them. This is a vast world. There have been many handprints that have built this city and this country. That's like the auto workers, they're like the legend of them. And to me, the movement of the story is to invoke them
Right.
and bring in what I call the ghosts of the plant, you know,
Yeah.
and the factory workers who have been, who have lost their jobs, like they are a part of this story. They are an omnipresent part of the story. And to remove that is to remove them, is to me, it's a part of erasure that I don't want to do.
You know, when I was talking to the steel workers, one of the things that really struck me is um, how much they talked about the physical impact
Mhm.
of the repetitive work that they do on their bodies. And so many of them were like my age, but looked 10 years older just because of the toll
Yeah.
of lifting something heavy every single day, you know, being on your feet for 8 to 10 hours, you know, having those short breaks. And so it felt like just, you know, in the production, it was Adisola, you know,
Yeah,
the
yeah,
movements that he was doing, just capturing not just the body, but the machine and
yeah.
that repetition, which I thought was super beautiful. Did you do any research? I mean, did you go in, because you said that your family has been on the factory floor, but I'm wondering, did you do any research?
I did. I visited the Four River Rouge factory, and I talked to the head of one of the local unions, you know, the UAW. I talked to my family. I have both management and on the floor workers, so I talked to both. Uh, I talked to. It's funny because I'm not somebody who's like, I got to do a gazillion amounts of research, but I actually did a gazillion amounts of research, you know, but I'm not the person that can go, I need a gazillion amounts of research. I just like, I need to know things. So I'll just like, when I need to know something, I'm like, who knows this? Who can I talk to? And it just like that number just kept growing, you know? And so I talked to a guy who was like the union rep, you know, on the floor. I talked to, uh, you know, here's a fun one, a part of my research. I got to this point where I was like, Des needs to steal something from this plant, you know, and I don't hold myself up to write, you know, if I don't have the research completed, I'll just write something and I'll come back and make it better later. You know, I'm like, well, he steals a rod. And I'm like, what's a rod? I don't know. I'm just putting that there. I'm gonna figure out what that really is later. And so I had a point where I'm like, I'm thinking he's gonna steal a big roll of sheet metal, and everybody I know is like, no, man, he can't do that. You know, I was like, okay, well, what can he steal? You know, or they're like, well, he could steal sheet metal, but he needs a truck. You know, so I've had people. So I did a call on Facebook, like, who's worked in a stamping plant? You know, somebody tell me. And then I'll get people like, oh, I worked in the factory, you know, and I'll go, so offline, can I just ask you, if let's just say I was going to steal something from the plant, you know, and then they'll go, well, offline. My father used to, or my uncle, so and so, you know, and I'm like, okay, people are telling me how to steal from the plant. And I was like, what can fit in a book bag? You know, so I start talking to workers
So you're
about,
talking about people like
yeah,
crowdsourcing.
I crowdsource my information. That's a good way to say it. I crowdsource my information. And then I also, I read books about factories closing. I read books about Detroit's history. Detroit, I Do Mind Dying is one of my favorite books that I read. And it's about the history of union, revolutionary union movement
Mm.
in Detroit.
Are you familiar with the photography of Latoya Ruby Frazier?
No, I'm not.
Oh, you haven't? Oh my God, I was sending.
Who is she? Yeah, tell me about it really quick. Tell us, all of us.
I mean, she number one, she's an incredible photographer, but one of the things that she's super interested in is just deindustrialization and capturing
Heard of her.
workers.
Mhm.
And her images are so beautiful, and she's, you know, she creates these large scale portraits of folks because she feels she understands like this is a dying moment in America and no one else is documenting. And just listening to you talk, I thought, oh, why are Black women stepping into this space and doing this kind of documentation, you know, creating the archive?
Yeah, yeah. You know, it's funny you say that because when I first wrote Skeleton Crew, I was talking to Michelle Wilson, who started Sweat, has played Cynthia, as we've been talking about. But I was talking to Michelle about she first read Skeleton Crew for me, and she was like, you know, this movement piece, the movement part of it. She was like, it's like she saw it visually the same way I saw it.
Right.
The Diego Rivera
Oh,
mural.
yes. Yeah, the mural that's there. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was like, yes, it's like Diego Rivera's mural coming to life. That's kind of what I envision the factory world of the play. And music, you asked me about music, but
The music, yeah.
I should say that our music was done for Skeleton Crew by my husband, Jay Keys. And he composes for me, but he's an artist from Detroit, who's now lived in New York, LA. But we're very into music. We DJ. We're very we're just totally into music. And his ear for our city is one that just I feel very just grounded in. And so when I was writing Skeleton Crew, I hear it musically because my husband plays a lot of music in our house. And I'm like, oh, so he plays a lot of Jay Dilla, who is a hip hop producer from Detroit, who's sort of like Jimmy calls him like the Finding Forrester of hip hop. And he's like a legendary producer that is one of our best. And he passed away many years ago, but we played Jay Dilla, and Jay Dilla has a whole like album of beats called The Factory, you know? Oh, it's called Donuts, but on Donuts, he has a beat called The Factory. And so like half of his beats sound very factory induced. And I'm like, there's a relationship between hip hop factory sounds. And so that was the sound to me of the play.
So that was soundtrack for it.
Yeah.
You know, it's interesting. Whenever I begin writing, the first thing I do is create a soundtrack for my play. And that soundtrack can sometimes like take 2 weeks. It's my form of procrastination. It's like I just have to have absolute right music before I can sit down and commit anything to the page. And then somehow it finds its way into the rhythm of the writing and shapes, shapes its sensibility.
Yes, I do the same thing. I have I have a Skeleton Crew playlist, and I have like a
Yes.
Pipeline playlist, and I have
Yep, I have the playlist. Now it's like because I'm old and I've been doing this a long time. On my computer in like Apple, you can see all the playlists, going way back to like the intimate apparel playlist.
That is a screenshot for Instagram, Lynn. We're gonna talk about how to put that on Instagram.
Yeah, but it's like
that's a good one. Yeah.
And so I know that we don't have a ton of time, but one of the questions I wanted to ask you, because we're in the midst of like this really fraught, difficult moment in which we're trying to figure out how is theater going to be more inclusive in the future, and how is it going to be more representative of our lived reality, so that when we return to this space, we're not sort of dealing with the same struggles that we dealt with before. And and that's I'm saying theater, but I could be speaking just about any of the industry, about the country as a whole. But I just was wondering whether you have any thoughts about the ways in which we as individual artists can press the powers that be
Yeah.
to begin to make these shifts that are absolutely necessary in order to create environments that are more diverse and
Yeah.
more welcoming.
Yeah, I know. I struggle with this question. I struggle with who should be doing that and how much investment I can keep putting into that in my
Yeah,
own life. Like
right,
how much I can keep trying to invest in asking other people to think about me in a more humane way. I don't know how
mm,
much I have left to give of that, but I do think that when I think of Skeleton Crew, it does, and I think of my father's essay, and I go, no, workers are the power in this country. Workers are the power in this country. I believe that holistically, and I believe it in our industry. And
right,
so I believe it takes that conversation that you're talking about, I think takes worker unity.
right,
And I would like to see workers have more conversations with each other,
right.
because a lot of us are having conversations with authority or gatekeepers or whatever, however, supervisors, however, whatever trade that you're in. We're having a conversation with the people that we think can grant us the thing. And I guess I'd like to see us have conversations with each other about what we collectively want to build,
Yeah.
because the building, the foundation is us. That's our we put the bricks together. It's on our, it's like you said, like the fatigue of the people who do the same work over and over again. It's people in the factories lost their hearing, lost limbs. I mean, in my play, there's scars, and I could have
Yeah,
lost
yeah,
an
that's one
arm.
of the things I think about. Faye is like wearing her body. I saw Linda Gravatt, and she just, she took all those years into the way in which she moved through that
Yeah,
space.
that's right. That's right. Yeah, when Linda performed that
You
role,
know,
it
she just
was
took it into her.
it was into her
It
posture.
went like in everything you knew. But going back to what you were saying, I mean, I think one of the difficulties that we face in theater is that so often we're invited into these spaces for short periods of time as
Yeah,
artists. And so
yeah,
uh we're there for 6 weeks and then we're on to another space, and it's difficult to do that work in all of these individual spaces
yeah.
when you're moving from place to place. And I do think that you're right, is that how do you build some sort of collective energy that allows all of us to be on dialogue on a regular basis?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I feel like I know that I want to make time
Oh,
for
yes.
like,
The questions.
I got like five questions we can answer.
Yeah.
And there's like, it looks like 35.
Yeah.
So, forgive me. I'll try to, what I would like to do is like, I'll answer some of them I'll post some answers, online if we don't get to your answers.
Well, we should get to the questions. I just wanted that to be the last question.
I love that question. I mean, yeah, my I'll say, all I can say is my hope for both my characters and for us as real life workers is that we find that we find our power in our trade, that we find our that what we bring to the table makes us super valuable and not expendable. Like
Right.
who we are as artists, what we bring to the table makes us valuable and not expendable. And so, and how we communicate about ourselves and what we have to give has to be from the framework that we know the value that we bring to the nation. And I would like to see leadership acknowledge that we are all here on the backs of the people that are out front. We're all here on the backs of the essential workers, on the people that we put most at risk for critique, most at risk for their health, most at risk for taking the slings and arrows of society, however they come. And those are the people that we need to center, we need to be listening to,
Mm.
because they are the ones who are out front. And so if I put you out front, if you are an artist and you've been out front for my work, I owe you at least engagement with you, who you are and what will make you feel safe. Like I owe you that. And so I would like to see us accept our debt to the working people and pay it forward.
That's beautiful. Thank you for that. You're always so wise, and I always leave conversations feeling much fuller and also optimistic.
Same,
We're
same,
talking
same with you.
about optimism. It's like, yes.
Yeah, same here. I'm working on it. I'm working on see what I say. I'm working on it.
So
how do we
yeah, I'm
ask?
not sure how we
Yeah.
take questions. Any, are
I
you?
will, yeah, I'll pipe in and take a couple questions, and you're so generous to say that you might offer some responses offline as well, but I will pick a few to send over to you guys. So the first one is for both you, Dominique and Lynn. What are the challenging parts of writing plays centered around real life communities?
I can say it and I'll pass the mic to Lynn. I mean, we
Okay.
kind of talked about it a little bit, but it's for me, it's always the being accurately reflecting them. You know, that's always my challenge. Writing real life communities is feeling like I'm accurately. I struggle to feel like first of all, I can't be the only voice. So whatever I offer can't be the only thing, you know, about that community. And I'm not like writing the Bible for them, you know, I'm just writing and offering about the people that I care about and or real life communities that I'm interested in and exploring. And then my own sense of agency inside of that community, like what I feel I can accurately represent in my work, from how deeply I understand that community. Those are the things that I wrestle with as a writer.
Yeah, I think absolutely. I feel very much the same way that Dom feels. And one of the things that I try and do is when I'm writing about communities that may not necessarily be my own community, is go inside and find our commonality and try and write about those rather than trying to write in a way that's exploitative in any way. It's like I can explain this is when I was writing Ruined. Um, and I was interviewing women from the Democratic Republic of Congo. I took a picture with a group of these women. It's only when I got home, I was wearing this very colorful boo-boo that I realized that I was in that photograph. And that became my entryway into the play. I said, I am not writing about them, I'm writing about myself. And so in all of my plays, I try and find myself in the characters, even in the villainous characters. And I think that that's the way I keep it honest and keep it real.
Yeah, yeah, that's great.
Thank you. So the next question is also for both of you. What advice would you give to early career Black women playwrights who are negotiating, wanting their work to be seen, but not have their voice or ideas be diluted?
Oh, God, that's
I know, right? We both took a breath
like a long exhale. What is the advice? I think about the advice that I had wish someone had given me when I was really a young writer, second guessing myself constantly, and leaning into the desires of others rather than my own desires is just, I think, is like clinging to the stories that you want to tell and being protective of them. And it may mean that sometimes you have to step away from certain spaces that are not going to nurture your voice, but that's okay because now we're living in a moment in which there's so many other places that you can take your stories.
That's right. And I would add to that as a young Black woman playwright, that I need to learn and grow. Like I felt like I needed to learn and grow. I do want my work to get better, and engaging in questions and ideas around my work does help me write better. But putting myself in a protective space means putting people who I think I can trust, who are have my best interest at heart. So, and if those people aren't in that room, then I need to get that person in the room to help me build that. And whether that's my director, or whether that's a dramaturg, or whether that's, some elder or some peer or just somebody that can help to interrogate my work with me, because I need interrogation of the work. I just don't want to make notes on work and interrogating work and development synonymous with oppressing your artistic voice, because those aren't the same. You do need to get better with your work. It will help you. You will grow, but you got to put the people that you trust to help you grow in that room with you.
Yeah, I think that that's 100% true.
Yeah.
So we'll take one final question, another big one. So again, for both of you, if art is redemption, what does redemption mean to you?
If art is redemption, what does
I just like to give you guys the really big ones.
Write that down because that is such a big.
It's a big, yeah.
Is art redemption? I mean, at first it's like unpacking whether art is redemption. I don't know whether that's necessarily true.
That's what I'm thinking of too. I'm not sure that
I
it.
don't think, I don't think, I can just speak very personally, is that when I'm writing, that is not the word that comes to mind. I mean, I think that, yeah. I don't know about you, Tom.
Yeah, I mean, I was looking like I I I don't know that it's redemption. I don't know that it needs to be. I mean, well, I'm not sure who's being redeemed.
Redeemed,
You
yeah.
know, I don't know who's being redeemed in art is redemption. But I do think that art is has redemptive properties for frankly, I think art can be redemptive for the people experiencing the art. So like if I'm watching the art and I've seen art where I have not known or have not thought about a community in that way before. And so the art taking me on the journey has opened my spirit up to like I've have had to check my own what I've never thought, like I've never thought I was homophobic, and then I watch somebody's work and I go, oh, well, if that's how they're experiencing homophobia, then I might have been homophobic, then that's work I have to do on me now to go, I think I just learned something about my humanity through somebody exploring their own humanity that's going to teach me to be a better person. That is where I can see art being redemptive, But for me, like I'm seeking my own human redemption because I'm understanding how harm has been caused in a way that I didn't understand that to be harmful, that teaches me like how to be a better person to others who I'm not thinking of, who aren't centered in my normal life experience, right? So that in that way, maybe, and that could be anything. That could
Yeah,
be
I mean,
working people could be the same way. Yeah, sorry.
because I guess the reason I was struggling with the question is because I think that so often I write about characters that are unredeemable. And
Right.
so it doesn't seem that redemption's at the center of the narratives, but I do think that the word for me is reclamation. And I think it can be about reclaiming certain aspects of self and community. And so for me, that feels like a more comfortable word to lean into than redemption.
Yeah, yeah, I'll take that too. And because the other reason I struggle with that phrase is because it's also about, I also don't write characters to be liked. And I kind of have a real resistance to the idea that I should be writing characters that are liked or easily understood. I'm like, people are not easily understood and they're not, and I find that to be, especially for women and women writers and then women of color and then Black women writers. My Black women, you don't have to like them. Like, that's okay. You don't have to like them. You don't have to like my male characters. You don't have to like my Latinx woman character. Like, you don't have to like my loud women characters or my quiet. You don't have to like them because they may not like you, and their liking them is not has nothing to do with their value. And I think that's we're really kind of stuck on that in society in general. Like, I mean, in a Facebook, like likes is a thing. Like how many times you get liked on social media is like increases your value on social media. Like liking has nothing to do with your value in life. I don't have to like anybody to know that their life is worth something. It has no it has no more or less value whether I like them or I don't like them. So I think we have to I'm more interested in agitating us as audience members to say, who cares if you like somebody?
Yeah.
Go on the journey. Go on the journey, learn something about their life, or wrestle with what you don't like. Get in conversation with what you don't like, as opposed to thinking that that means that I need to do some work on my character. Like maybe you need to do some work on your character.
Yeah, I think that's
you know.
really, really true. And I also think that our role as artists isn't necessarily to come up with those very neat answers. Is in like you, I'm really interested in characters that lean into their moral ambiguity and that are struggling with like, where do I stand? Do I lean toward the darkness or whether I lean toward the light? And I think that one of the beauties about what we do is that we leave that question with the audience and then they can go home and then grapple with those questions, in the comfort of their their own spaces.
And the hope is that they will grapple with the question.
Hopefully.
We agitate them enough,
Yeah.
they'll go home and be still irked and be having that conversation. That's the hope. Yeah.
You two are amazing. I feel like that's, I could go on and ask so many more questions because it's such a treat to listen to you. But I feel like that very answer speaks to how one of the many reasons we love and admire you, because you question the very question, you know. So it's just been a total pleasure. I will turn it over to Claire to wrap things up, but I cannot thank you both enough. It was just a huge treat.
Thank you.
I second that.
Thank you for the invitation.
We are all better and wiser for having spent this time with you and your characters, and we just cannot thank you enough for gifting us this space. It's really something special, especially as we're not all able to be in the theater together, but what it does afford us is extreme intimacy. This is different in a good way. So thank you so much. And Dominique, thanks for letting us remount that exquisite play.
Thank you for getting me back in conversation. This conversation with Lynn is one we've always wanted to talk about.
I know we weren't talking, so thank you.
So thank you for facilitating it.
Yeah, Lynn, thank you so much. That was fantastic.
It was a joy for me.
Yeah, and for anyone who either joined late or couldn't stay for the whole thing, we have recorded this session and we'll be sharing it on social media as well, so that you can really, or you can listen to all of it over again, which I will do. I'll just say, we're wrapping up this first half of our reunion series, and we're soon getting ready to do Guards at the Taj, which will be the next play in this cycle, and also an exquisite play. So we hope that you'll join all of us for that. And other than that, do not forget to vote. And thank you, everybody.
All right.
Be well. Bye, Dom. Bye, Lynn.
Bye. Bye, you guys.